sing a couple songs for you now. They gave me the microphone. I'd like to welcome you to today's open forum, and thank you for being here to talk with us about the MyCampus survey that went out recently. The survey is a kickoff component of our campus master planning, and our campus master planning will be a year-long exercise. We want to continue to engage with you throughout that entire planning period, so today is really a continuation of that plan. Sasaki Associates, an architectural planning and design firm, internationally known and has done campus master planning all over the country, is here to share the preliminary survey analysis and to hear your questions. What I'd like to do now is introduce Maggie Dolan. And what Maggie will do, Maggie's the project manager for Sasaki Associates on this particular project, and she will lead today's presentation and discussion, and I'm sure we're going to welcome your questions. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Hate to be aloft, but I need to click on my computer, so feel free to jump in at any time with questions. Definitely want this to be an interactive conversation. Can you all hear me all right? Okay. So as Lou said, we're at the beginning with the university of a year-long master plan process. We were on campus for the first time just 3 weeks ago and are back for a second round of stakeholder interviews and building walkthroughs. The MyCampus survey as well as the faculty collaboration survey have both been closed for just over a week. So what you're going to see today is definitely a first round of analysis. There's a lot more to be mined from this survey, and I definitely want to hear what you have to say in reaction to some of the comments that we're pulling out as fodder for discussion. So as you can see here, good response rate, 3,000 responses. You're the second highest ever campus responses. Staff really led the way for most of the time, and then the students caught up at the end of the weekend, that final weekend. So about 45% student responses, almost 40% staff, and the remaining 16% faculty. Pretty even distribution among the class years, first year through graduate students. And then in terms of the college distribution, the leader is the sort of other academic and administrative unit group, which includes University College. A lot of that number is fed by the really high staff response rate. The College of Visual and Performing Arts, very vocal, very grateful for your comments. You'll see some of them on the screen in a bit. And then the remaining schools, College of Arts and Sciences, of course, huge part of the campus, good responses there. And then the remaining schools are smaller and also have a smaller total responses. And the percentages you're seeing there are the percentage of total responses and not necessarily a ratio of the individuals within the school to the number of responses from that school. Just wanted to clarify that. Probably not surprising, when we ask the question, where do you live? Students, about half live on campus. Very few live more than 2 miles away. That's really going to affect commuting patterns. And the opposite is true for faculty and staff, where 16 said they lived on campus, but a majority, 75%, said that they live at least 2 miles away. So we had over 42,000 icons placed, which is incredible. A lot of those included comments, so definitely a lot of great material to mine for discussion. You'll see these are ranked in order of the number of times they were placed on the map. The color coding divides the student responses from the faculty responses. And so you can see that the top response is the unsafe icon. And we'll get into that a little later. It's not that unusual for a campus in an urban area where the edges between the community and the campus are a little blurry. So we've seen that before. And then beyond that, a lot of people talked about their walking patterns, and then dining, classroom, working, just some of the day-to-day functions of what you're doing at the university. For a few icons, people were able to specify whether it was a high-quality or low-quality space, and the piece to take from this slide is just that people are generally very pleased. The green is generally very high. Classrooms are the one area where there's a larger number of negative icons. So we'll look at that as well. All right, so getting into the maps. So let me see if this laser works. Is it this? This or that? Well, maybe I'll use the mouse. I just want to orient you all to where we are on the map. So as you can see, this is main campus. The Courier Dome is under some of these lines. Then we get into the Manley Fieldhouse Athletic Area and South Campus down here. You can see the highway dividing downtown from the east portion of campus. So here you see the freshman and sophomore walking patterns. This was one of the more surprising slides that we saw, just because the network was so tight. And we'll see that reflected in some of the other pieces as well. And then as students go through the university and become juniors, seniors, grad students, that pattern really begins to expand. So they're living on the east side, walking to the east, walking much more on the north-south streets, and also more activity to South Campus. And for faculty and staff, we were really surprised to see this intense activity along Comstock. Yeah. So this intense activity along Comstock here, which we think is related to where people are parking. So this is the map for transit routes and bus stops that people are taking. We heard that 90% of the transit activity, the shuttle activity, comes from South Campus, and so you can see that reflected on the map. Really intense activity along Comstock. The largest shuttle stop definitely at Manley, and people left some comments to talk about their commuting experiences. So one issue voiced by a staff person, which you can see at the bottom, is that bus service is great, but that when students go away, the service isn't as frequent, and so it can cause some problems for commuters who are parking far away from main campus and can't necessarily get to main campus as quickly. Some people talked, as you can see at the top, about being unable to board buses during high traffic times like 5 o'clock or at the beginning of the semester, and just how that unpredictability can cause some frustrations for them as well. And then a VPA student talks about the remoteness of facilities and the way that there used to be a shuttle that connected to main campus, but it doesn't run in the same way anymore. So again, these are just some comments that pull out some themes that we're seeing on these different maps. So this is the bike pattern. Not that many lines, not surprising for a place as wintry and hilly as Syracuse. So you can see that this east-west movement along Euclid, not surprising since it's a flatter street connecting our upper-class students where they're living to the main area of campus. These are the driving patterns. So people coming in from all over the highway, connecting to their parking mostly. And these are the parking icons. As you can see, strong connection between Manley's shuttle stop and its parking garages. And it wouldn't be a campus if there weren't lots of comments about parking, so here are just a few of them. So one is the cost. People voice frustration, especially in remote areas, that they're parking far away. That plus the shuttle cause some issues for people, that they have to park, and then there's an additional time in order to get to where they're going. So affordability is voiced here in Manley, and that, again, sometimes the shuttle will pass and they won't be able to get on the first one that comes because it's too full. Someone parking on the West Campus near the law school says that it's pretty good, except that wintry conditions cause issues. And then there's this one that says, I'm disabled and would benefit from closer handicapped parking. My impression is that if I apply for it, I'll be moved to the far handicapped lot and bussed in. One thing that we heard in our initial stakeholder interviews is that procedures aren't always necessarily clear. And so that's something that seemed to come out here, that the person had the impression that they would be moved versus knowing explicitly what was going to happen if they tried to make a change. So I just thought that was interesting. So this is a housing map for freshmen and sophomores. As you can see, housed on campus, very close in. That changes when people get into their junior, senior, and graduate student years, where they're living much more in the east neighborhood, some in the north. Some comments from upperclassmen. This first one talks about, this person says, housing is insanely expensive on campus, so I moved off campus to an apartment that has some landlord issues, but it's less expensive. And that also, I think it reflects another comment from a staff member who's lived in that neighborhood for 48 years and says that it used to be a really great mix of both faculty, staff, and students, but that balance is swinging more now, and the neighborhood just isn't as kind of stable as it used to be. So you can see that reflected in the way the student talks about the quality of the housing. In South Campus, this person says, the best place to live. There's a lot of conversation about amenities, like being able to have your own room, having more space, but the commute is a downside for South Campus students. So we'll zoom into the core campus area now. And people's comments about housing were really mostly about bathrooms. We're getting ready to do campus tours starting this afternoon, and are eager to get into the residence halls and see what they're really like. And so this was kind of surprising to us that bathrooms were really the overwhelming theme of renovation needs in the dormitories. A lot of smiles. I look forward to hearing what you all have to say about that. On the west side, pretty close into campus, so not as far as south, but that there's still a sense of social isolation, especially from other freshmen. And then for those on Mount Olympus, love community, hate bathrooms, hate distance. So being sort of isolated in a little group helps people really bond with one another, but also they feel like it's harder to get to the core of campus.
Question?
Yes?
Is that an architect?
Yes, it is. And there's a comment too, that they're living there on Studio Next. So this is, sorry, going back. So this is the overall classroom pattern. Just wanted to point out that there are a lot of classes clustered around the main campus area, but can't forget some of the VFA classes to the north, classes near Manly, and even some classrooms on south. So just didn't want to ignore that as we go into comments closer in. As you can see, the red dots indicate negative comments or thumbs down icons. And so you can see that reflected in some of the comments. A lot of talk about Link just needing some condition upgrades, especially in terms of HVAC issues causing noise and temperature control problems. Huntington Hall had a lot of red, so I called that out. Again, temperature control, not being able to open windows, just some of those environmental concerns. And then the business school has amazing classrooms, but the person recognizes that not everyone has classroom facilities that are that nice. Okay, so again, the working and studying icons, to zoom out, you can see that people are really distributed all over the map, and pulled out a comment here. I was wondering if most of these people were students studying in their dorms, but also some staff located down in the southern portion, and some of them have to come back and forth to main campus. And then also the warehouse studio time. And so to zoom in, we see the distribution on main campus, including the positive and negative comments. In terms of studying, it was kind of surprising to us that, as you can see in the first two comments, what we've heard from students is that people at Syracuse seem to really appreciate quiet study spaces, and so we'll be thinking about that as we go through Bird Library, which is now sort of a hybrid social and study area, so maybe the people who want a lot of quiet aren't getting that, even though libraries are more and more becoming social hubs, so we'll take a look at how to try and balance that in the master plan with maybe some other space options or thinking about the library itself. Carnegie is the second comment, just an alternative study space, which was cited as being really quiet. And then something that we heard a lot in our interviews, that many of the classroom buildings or office buildings don't really have those sort of flexible spaces where people can gather. So that's really highlighted here where someone's talking about the art building and just saying that there's really only the hallway, and other than that, it's all pretty closed off and restricted. All right, this is the distribution of dining for all responses. A lot downtown, some on Westcott Street to the east. M Street, of course, is a hub. So if someone says the best restaurants in Syracuse are downtown, we've been to Dinosaur Barbecue, so we'd agree and would appreciate other recommendations. And then as a theater student, they were making a lot of comments about the lack of meal swipe options close to Syracuse Stage. So very vocal about that need and the way that they have to go off campus and aren't able to use their meal plan on a regular basis. And other than that, people were generally fine with the dining for various locations. There would be some people who would just be like, oh, there's not any variety, the food's terrible, and other people would be like, it's great. So, so generally, food's okay. There were comments at Ernie Davis, though, saying that there's an overcrowding issue, and so sometimes people can't find places to sit to enjoy the meal that they just bought. Okay, so socializing. This is the map for freshmen and sophomore only. So again, you can see a very restricted dot pattern, very close to where they're walking, where they're living. Someone talks about M Street, just the connection between going out for food and socializing. Shine, a lot of positive comments from freshmen and sophomores about Shine, which kind of changed a little bit as people got older. So it's an active place where you run into people that you know, this person says. And then another comment from Mount Olympus saying just that having that community that's up on the hill away from other people keeps them socializing with each other, so it's a strong bond. So then when you go to the junior and senior pattern, again, everything kind of pulls out to the east a little more where people are living. More activity along Westcott Street, which is similar to what the faculty and staff are saying as well. And some comments. So downtown Syracuse for restaurants and bars, and more fraternity house party activity talked about for upper class students. So this is the safety icon response. And so as you can see on the map, heavy concentration along Comstock. I think the week that this survey was released, there was an incident on Comstock, so that might influence the dot pattern there. Heavy perception of lack of safety in Thorndon Park. You can see the heavy dot icon there, and then sort of smattering distribution along the West Campus area, especially at this underpass where people are walking and probably parking. And then also in the West Campus area, just a kind of scattered dot pattern. And so one thing I want to highlight is that we haven't correlated this with crime data or anything like that, so this is really about campus perception. So Thorndon Park, a lot of people said it's great during the day, they love it as an open space, but they just know don't go there at night, don't go there alone. So that comment reflects that. The second comment, when we ask people what's unsafe, we leave that really open to interpretation. So some campuses, it'll all be about traffic and being afraid that they'll be hit by a car. So this is one of those more transportation-related comments where the person says, these stairs are often wet, crumbling, and generally in poor repair. So those are the stairs leading down from next to the stadium toward the parking. This is another perception comment that someone was told not to live west of I-81. So maybe one reason that we don't see a lot of dots on the west side is that there's just a sense that living in other areas is safer. And then this Comstock comment, I thought just encapsulated a lot of the different pieces that might be contributing to a feeling of unsafety. Need better sidewalks, so infrastructure questions, also additional lighting, especially along the cemetery, which can be sort of isolated. And then the desire for more frequent security patrols when people are making that longer walk, even during the day. So then we get to outdoor spaces. Some people talked about recreation facilities and that there's a need for more of those so that athletic fields and recreation both have their own space and both have adequate space, but wanted to zoom in on the core campus area for this icon. So as you can see, the quad is really the place to be. People talked about Frisbee and just seeing people coming in and out of class. This person says, I love to sit on the steps of Hendrix and read. There were a lot of comments about Hendrix, and we're trying to think a lot about how outdoor spaces connect with indoor spaces, and so since Hendrix was cited so many times, I wanted to put that up there as a place where buildings are really connected to the landscape. A lot of comments about this little ESF courtyard, and that it's a great place to go for quiet that's really close to campus. And then a lot of amphitheater comments, but again, some people are staying away because there's a perception that it's not safe. And so if you look at this map and then compare it to the heart of campus map, you can see the quad really is the center for many people, and the carrier dome is the second. And these are the final comments, and then we'll open up for discussion. So without a doubt, someone said the quad is the heart of campus. And then I liked this one, the dome where the heartbeat can be heard. So just loving just being able to feel a part of Syracuse as an entire group and not just as one unit within the university. So this is our first round of analysis. Would love to hear what resonated, what's missing, what's surprising.
An accurate description of what many of you feel as you walk around campus or have had comrades say?
Yeah? How would you all react to the safety icon? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right, so we're going to be correlating from you all with the actual safety reports from campus safety and police. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll be able to register our dot pattern you're describing to what they're actually reporting. Yes,
ma'am. I wanted to add that I think it does definitely make a difference about the time of day, that people might perceive Comstock or Thornton Park as being fine during the day but dangerous at night, and I think that is not just a perception. I think there's some reality to that. And I also think that it's a shame that there are dots within the same places where people are indicating that they think is the heart of the campus.
So that may be indicating that obviously daytime, nighttime, one of the issues is what's the quality of lighting in those areas. So obviously on campus in the core or on public streets, what's our coordination policy with city on street lighting, et cetera, especially in those high incident corridors. Oh, okay. So I'm Ricardo Dumont. I'm with Sasaki as well. One of Maggie's partners. This is Gregory Jenks, Mariano Campo, and Katja Luce.
The transportation remarks, I think, rang very true, especially about the times when classes are not in session and staff and graduate students as well are still trying to get around. We have a lot of graduate students on campus over the summers, over breaks, continuing to work, and the busing system can become very, very difficult to work with as you realize you have hour-and-a-half gaps between buses and whatnot. So.
If I can, I want to get back to the lighting issue, and that it has to be thoughtful lighting. There are lights on Comstock Ave. They're above the trees. That does no good. They light the tops of the trees. It has to light where the people are. So it's got to be a thoughtful placement of lights. There's a sample right out here where the lights are in the middle of the sidewalk. It creates a safety issue because you can't plow the sidewalks properly without hitting a light post, and therefore they're not plowed properly. And for just plain walking, you can walk into a light post by being on the sidewalk. So it's the thoughtful lighting that has to be done.
Just one thing with the stairs and the repair, I think anybody knows that when there's a game, you know if it's snowy, those stairs are going to be shoveled and taken care of when you're walking from those parking lots. But if there's not a game, there's no guarantee, and you can be walking up a foot of snow.
I may have missed it, but was there anything brought up about bikes and cars and walking on this campus's safety? Because there are multiple times, especially when classes are let out, that students literally just walk across the street and they don't even think about the safety of not only themselves, but the bikes and the driver.
I didn't pull out any comments about that, but yes, we've definitely heard just from both sides, students feeling unsafe crossing the streets in front of campus, and then also just that lack of awareness.
As the director of off-campus and commuter services, what I'm noticing is that the students that are living off campus have an expectation that their walk home, and their safety is that we should care about it more, and that we should do more to ensure their safety. We've gotten, reports because of whether it's a break-in or someone's car got broken into, or there's not adequate lighting, like whether it's on the streets or even at their properties, that they're coming to us to find out, like, what can we do to help them? How can we be a liaison to the city to make sure that they're being safer? Parents are reaching out to us. So I think that just because they're off campus, that the areas that aren't necessarily touching campus, like near Harrison and Madison Street and other areas of the university neighborhood, that students are looking to us to take more effort, put more effort into their safety as they walk home, or how are they going to get home if they're not in the Shuttle U Homes area, which is the shuttle that DPS uses. There are students that are not in that shuttle area and still struggle to get home because they can't bring their cars to campus.
Hi. So I want to talk about the campus heart. That image is not the whole campus. So are there dots in the warehouse at Syracuse Stage, at Com Art, at 621 Skytop Road? How will the study seek to engage? Actually, just in your presentation of the statistics, it was percentage of the total. How will the work seek to engage individuals who are distributed beyond this image?
That's a great question. I think one reason to stress percentage of the total at the beginning is that it's an open survey. We didn't do a scientific random sampling. It's really meant as a forum. And so when some people are responding a lot and others not so much, we just want to sort of acknowledge that that might be part of the pattern that you're seeing. In terms of the areas that are not in the heart of campus on the map, the main campus on the map, there were some icons for people whose primary location are in those areas, especially the warehouse. And we'll be touring the warehouse tonight and talking with those students. So yeah, definitely ready to understand what those outlying areas are like.
So just a comment, just by this, selecting a subset to show the dots in this area, it communicates a message to individuals who are outside of this map that they're not part, implicitly, it's like not part of the campus.
And some of the comments reflect that. Students saying, I wish I were more connected, but I'm at the warehouse all the time.
It does reflect the nature that we are a very dispersed campus. So academically, we're quite distant from warehouse to core campus here. Obviously, residentially, having 1,800 beds of students on the South Campus, and then that coming back up to the core campus. So that dispersal does have some negative connotations.
Right, but just the presentation of the data reinforces that message, that individuals who are in academic programs that are not in this image are not central to the university.
Thanks.
I think that's an important observation, but I would challenge a little bit that it's a representational issue. I think it's what the data is reflecting, right? Because we could show the same image and you see a few outliers, but you still see the vast majority and concentration of the dots here. So I think that the question is, at least for me, as Ricardo was kind of illuminating, not to say focus on this and forget about everybody else, but think holistically about the campus and the city as one organism and one system, and the connections between and through that.
So back to the early slides where you had raw numbers of total responses and percentage of the total. It would be interesting to do the percentage of the subpopulations.
Mm-hmm. And we've already committed to doing that. I think that's a very important point.
I just have a question about if there was any assessment of walking patterns and how they intersect with traffic patterns. Often I see a lot of walkers who are using traffic designated areas for walking or taking shortcuts through parking lots that create safety issues and unawareness of traffic that is trying to navigate through the same areas. So I guess it would just be an assessment of the patterns and how can we make that better for walkers and better for drivers. So I guess it would be looking at...
One of the things we can do, excellent question, is actually correlate and actually overlay traffic patterns with the pedestrian patterns and see where those conflicts tend to be. So we can actually recombine these messages as different data sets and see where those types of conflicts occur.
Yeah.
Okay. Obviously, we're doing field observations as well, so these are sort of verifying the very field observations we make. Thank you.
Just to follow up and on that point, Euclid Ave in the winter, I hope you come back during the winter. Yeah. Good. That's all student housing, and no one shovels the sidewalk. And so the only way to get from Euclid, down Euclid to campus is to walk in the street. There's cars at least on one side of the street, many cars are illegally parked on the other side, and all the traffic has to come in. And there's occasionally you'll see people from the neighborhood with babies and strollers in the street, in the snow. It's a terribly unsafe environment. There was a time when the university actually worked with some of the landlords, and landlords paid a fee, and the university plowed the sidewalks. I think this was a pilot program a couple of years ago. It's a great idea. I don't really know how well it worked out, but just something to suggest, because that's really a situation that's fraught with problems. And even if you don't have a lot of accidents, it's just so stressful for everyone coming to and from work in all the snow, both the students and the people driving.
Well, I can actually tell you, I was here 40 years ago, so I can remember walking down Euclid in winter time, obviously some of the same. But there actually was a greater home ownership at that time, so there's actually many more shoveled sidewalks in front of the houses. So as that demographic has changed and there's more landlords there and more student populations, obviously that set of consideration on individual properties is not going to occur. So given the amount of traffic and some of the safety concerns we've noted, if we overlay those two values, you'd start thinking about how do we work with the city better on programs for that in the weather, which tends to be inclement during the weather here.
The microphone's coming.
When I think about safety issues, three things come to mind. First, the cyclist without a helmet, ignoring the stop signs, and going right through an intersection texting. And I've seen this multiple times. And so one concern that I have is about the risk to all of us of blazingly imprudent behavior on the part of some of the cyclists. Second is along the road in front of the Shine Center and Bird Library, where the bus stops are ideally placed to maximize risk to students. The bus stops are in exactly the wrong place if you're concerned about safety. They should be in front of the crosswalk, not behind the crosswalk, and there are near misses on a daily basis in that area. So these are some of the very small, detailed situations in which many of us just stop and wonder, what can they have been thinking? Third is the restructuring of Waverly, which is a new traffic pattern that for the moment people are coping with, but it's hard to imagine what will happen when there's snow that has to be plowed and put somewhere. And there's no obvious where for it to go. And I suspect that we're going to find some very distressing safety-related issues along the redesigned Waverly and perhaps some other places which look as though they've been designed as if every day will be as today is. Would that it could be so.
There was another comment up here.
Thank you so much for being here today and sharing this information with us. I have a question about the first and second year student comments you had on the socializing. I work with the Office of First Year and Transfer Programs, so of course I was interested in that. Could you expand a little on the feedback that you got from students, perhaps in that category, about where they're socializing, quality of the space, any concerns related to that?
It's something we can definitely dig deeper on. I would say at a first pass, it seems like there's a lot of excitement just being on campus, and so places like the Student Center, the residence halls are really the focus. And then it seems like the upperclassmen get a little tired of those spaces after a while and start exploring or just expressing more dissatisfaction about those core spaces. But it's something we can definitely look into more, yeah.
And I think part of the issue with respect to that really is a facilities issue, because Shine is, Shine is a great facility, but it's relatively small and doesn't actually have a lot of space in it for students. It has some important space, but not a whole lot. And Maggie talked about how folks are moving into Bird as well because of that, but that has its own issues. And then when you look within the core campus, we don't have a lot of those spaces in many of the buildings. So there really aren't a whole number of venues for those kinds of activities to take place. So, Marshall Street shows up and Shine shows up. But I think it's a very important question because it's intimately linked to the academic question. I think that's what we sort of have to, you can't sort of parcel it off as a sort of separate piece. And it's interesting to note that particularly for our first and second year students, so much of their world is constricted to that picture, rightly or wrongly. So understanding that dynamic and then understanding how the various systems can help them within that, I think, is absolutely key to the study.
Hi, I have a question over here. It really is more related to process than to any of the specifics about this. So there are places where clearly any campus master plan is going to have to interface with the city, with the public works. There are places where that interfaces with the university policy. I mean, I'm thinking specifically about parking, and I won't go into my own Kafka-esque situation where that's concerned. But how do you guys, once you've arrived at some conclusions, what's the process for those actually becoming implemented when you have to interface with all of these different areas that aren't necessarily directly related to the physical planning aspects of it?
So next meeting at 1:30 I have is understanding what is their city review process of all the zoning and overlays when we actually have to implement projects. So we're going to be understanding those policies that are now on campus, what we have to work with when we're actually building buildings, changing utilities, changing parking or transportation systems. So we'll be understanding that, and at some point in the process, we will probably have an interface with the city to understand what their sort of viewpoint, just like your viewpoint is to us, what their viewpoint of the university and where the rubs are and where the rubs aren't. So we'll hopefully understand what the legality is of the zoning and regulatory process, and then understand from a police standpoint, transportation, and obviously major utilities standpoint, since all of our streets are their streets running through the campus, and obviously the utility questions there are major for us. So, big interface when we're sort of at the end point of the analysis phase. Yeah, okay?
I remember from the survey there being a question about what folks thought campus was. There was like a highlighter sort of method, and I noticed that you haven't shared that.
Right.
And so I would be really interested about that gradient, especially when it comes to off-campus, about what students are, especially students are thinking about what is actually the campus area. And then secondly, about this map that you have up, the dome is really the only space we have that can hold all of us. There is no larger than a 1,500 person space on campus for like programming and things. And so I'm unsurprised that the dome got so many marks, and then the other ones being in spaces that could hold more people, literally.
Yeah, where people can really gather and connect. You're very right about the campus boundary icon, and we definitely need to add that into the analysis. We looked at it, but just didn't include the images, in part because the pedestrian story really told a lot of that. And so what we found is that for freshmen, it's a very tight, contained campus boundary that really fits into the main campus for the most part. And then that continues to grow until, for graduate students, it was basically all of the map from the highway into the east area, down to South Campus, and up to the warehouse. I mean, the campus is Syracuse for a lot of people, especially as they are moving through the university. So that's something that we just haven't had a chance to put together. And also want to break that down by school too, to understand our VFA students, how do they perceive the campus if they're at the warehouse all the time, or some people drawing little boxes. So some of those tighter breakdowns are something we definitely want to do on that icon. Thanks for bringing it up.
I thought the comments about the housing, especially the housing around the university and not on campus, were particularly poignant. And I think they speak somewhat to an issue of supply and demand, that over the course of a number of years with increasing enrollment, we've pushed more students into the neighborhood. And so we have more problem landlords because students aren't able to choose, okay, I shouldn't live here, let me find a better place, because there are no better places because there is no place with rooms. And so we have to live wherever we can. And so I think that's definitely a component, and I've heard that's something being looked at, but looking at on-campus housing availability, what kind of capacities do we have, and what kind of mechanisms do we have to help direct students toward better off-campus landlords and whatnot, and to be able to, especially I'm thinking of international students particularly coming in who arrive here and within an extremely short time period, sometimes of days, need to figure out where they're living and how to handle that, or they're doing it from China, basically reaching out and trying to sign a lease agreement. So, definitely something that I think deserves attention.
Right, and we've heard that a lot for grad students, for visiting faculty, just that some of those alternative housing options aren't made apparent.
I think in some way the housing responses were amongst the most surprising to us, surprisingly positive. I mean, other than Ernie Davis, at least from a thumbs up, thumbs down perspective, given that the majority of the housing stock is not, shall we say, youthful, we were expecting folks to probably be a little more unhappy than they appeared to be. I mean, other than, when you dig into the comments, you see some questions around bathrooms and stuff. But for the on-campus housing, folks seem relatively pleased. Now, it gets back to the sort of whole conversation of geography and dispersal and, all those other issues. But I think that was probably the most surprising thing for us.
I think also for us is the issue of, so what is the academic idea that actually drives the residential idea? So, from faculty, different age groups of students. So one of the things we've been exploring with Lou and the team here is So what is the overall residential idea moving forward? How do we actually manage enrollment about that idea? And then are there international student issues, faculty issues, untenured faculty issues that we would normally deal with in other campuses? And how do we actually move those ideas around where we want to go academically? So we believe it's not just beds anymore. Housing is certainly not beds. In the campus of the future, it's got to be intimately linked to improving academic performance as well as civic performance of the students. So I think that's going to be a major topic we're going to be wrestling with in the next several months. Does that make sense?
So first, I want to thank you for the briefing. It was fascinating. I want to congratulate and thank you for the survey. The instrument that was used, the web interface, was fun to use, and it was really good. So just to follow on what you just shared, I'm curious about the timeline and the process for the next steps. And in addition, there was a companion survey for faculty members on collaboration. And when will those results be available?
In terms of overall timeline, this is our second time on campus, and we tend to have a three-part process when we're doing a master plan. So first is this intense information gathering stage, which we call analysis. Analysis and information gathering really never end throughout the process, but that's what we're devoted to specifically right now. And then after a few months, we start creating ideas, throwing out ideas for the future, and then really focus in on implementation in the final phase, which is the last few months of the process. So that's just an overall overview, so definitely still in the listening stage right now. In terms of the faculty collaboration survey, we're definitely going to share that with you all probably, I think, when we're back in January, and that'll be part of an overall academic story, so more woven into a broader analysis that will link to things like the building walkthroughs that we're doing today, a lot of other data sets. But yes, that will be coming.
I think it's very important to emphasize that there are no answers at this point because we're still trying to figure out what the questions are.
Yeah.
So we're very much in a problem-seeking mode, and that's something that we all together have to do. And it's also very important to emphasize that no one of these data sets is determinative. The idea is to think about how do they all come together and synthesize to form a kind of overall picture. So it's just very important to emphasize both of those points.
Yeah, so the next part of this analysis is now going into a statistical analysis. So we're going to be walking in various things. We'll be 80 here today, tomorrow, Thursday, walking through every building on campus. I myself will be working with a colleague on all the residential buildings to confirm or not confirm the residential health of the campus. Maggie and Greg and others will be walking through all laboratory buildings and academic buildings. We did a bunch of administration uses today. So the goal is to get a working knowledge of most of the building inventory and portfolio of the campus so that'll again support where should reinvestment occur on the academic side of the house as well as the residential side. Okay?
And I thank you for your comment about the survey itself. And just selfishly, I want to ask the crowd just for a minute, how many of you all took the survey? Everyone? Amazing. How did you all find out about it? We've been seeing some lower response rates, especially from students recently, which have really surprised us because they tended to be the drivers in other campuses. So I don't know, are people looking at it on their phones and then not going back to their computer? If there's anything that you all know about the patterns of the way you engaged with the survey or the reasons that other people may not have taken it, we would just love to know that for the future. So if you all know that, maybe you all can come up to me afterward. That would be really helpful. Yes, sir.
Much of what you've said is about what people do, the patterns that are observable. It doesn't tell us much about what people would do if we had a Kresge Auditorium, a Tressiter Union, a Bailey Hall, all of the kinds of facilities that are so central to the life of some of the other universities. And I'm wondering how you're going to get at that kind of question. We do not have an auditorium at Syracuse University. If we did have, the patterns of behavior would be very different. how do you get at the hypothetical, the counterfactual?
We have a couple of different techniques, and I don't know that we've settled on exactly which will be the most appropriate to use here, but one is a similar example to MyCampus, where you could posit different future scenarios and have folks sort of interact with that, and you can choose whether or not to believe what people say, but that's one option. We have another sort of crowdsourcing tool like this, which is a little more interesting because it brings the resource constraints side into things. So it's sort of what would you like to achieve, and then you sort of, so you get fake stars to hand out to your priorities, and then you get fake money to assign between your priorities and those kinds of exercises. So there's certainly sort of virtual strategies that we can employ. We would never want to de-emphasize this kind of setting where we can have a face-to-face conversation with folks and kind of get their input, particularly as we sort of move into the scenarios phase. And then we have fairly broad representation across the campus in various committees and working groups that we're interacting with. And so part of the task there is to make sure that those people are kind of open channels of communication. They can act as kind of beacons that amplify thoughts from across the campus. So it has to be a holistic strategy. It's not never any one thing, but there can be virtual tools, there can be public forums, and then there can be more structured settings.
You know, one of the things in the middle phase, which is Maggie's selected as the scenarios phase. So there, we're going to be positing several ideas based on some of the things that we're seeing and hearing here and throughout the analysis phase. Also, we'll be correlating that with what's the future of enrollment growth in the campus, where do we want to go there, where's the financial health of the institution, how do we correlate that into solutions. I think the idea that in that critical middle phase, we'll be showing you several ideas about how the campus could be moving towards the future, both the immediate future and the long term. Now, correlated with that would be, but what are the principles by which we believe? So the idea that we had also not only established design and academic directions with you, but also what are the bedrock principles that makes SU, SU? So whether it be geography, the health of the quad, the relationship to M Street, student life, you know, I think one of the things we do think a lot about, though surprising there weren't a lot of negative comments about, is residential life we think is a huge issue on the campus. Not from a standpoint of poor building condition, but what does, if we weren't a dispersed campus, what would that mean to us? If we were more cohesive, what would that mean? What would that drive as solutions? So I think in that middle phase is when the rubber sort of hits the road and we have to discuss with you, here's a scenario where we become less dispersed. Here's a scenario where we concentrate all of our academic energies here. Or here's a scenario where we may have an outpost of warehouse, the core campus, the south. What happens if we continue to develop along that strategy? So that's a critical phase to have you in the room and have that feedback as we sort of put forth some of these ideas. Okay? Is that it? Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.